Well, if you've got problems with your imponderables, then help is at hand now on to Therapy from Clive Anderson.
Welcome to Notes and Queries, a programme of meticulous research, precise scientific inquiry, learned discourse, freely mixed up with old wives' tales, hearsay, bluff and guesswork. In this series, we attempt to tell you everything you always wanted to know about, well, everything, but didn't dare ask, didn't know who to ask, or didn't know who to believe once you had asked. As usual, helping me with my inquiries is Carol Vorderman, who is equally at home with mathematics as she is at mathematics with home.
Absolutely, whatever that means.
Yes, indeed. Now, it's a magnificent display you've got here.
Oh, thank you very much, yes.
It's good that you've raided your old Women's Institute larder, because how it happens, the first question relates to this, which is, what is the difference between jam and marmalade?
Easy. Well, you see, that's jam, and that's marmalade.
Oh, right. Well, that solves that. So, like, marmalade is sort of yellowy jam.
Not quite, you see, because what you have to look at is where the word comes from.
Oh, marmalade. So that could work.
Is
that French, like ma, meaning mother, and malade, meaning ill. My mother's ill, hence give us some marmalade. Is that it?
No, it actually comes from the Greek words, and there's meli, which means honey.
Right.
And melon, which means apples, so you have meli-melon.
Meli-melon.
Yeah.
And that means, oh, marmalade, I see. So the Greeks had a word for marmalade?
No, you see, the Greeks didn't make marmalade, but the Portuguese took the word and they corrupted it to marmelo.
Oh, it's typical. So the Greeks have a word for stuff they don't make, which is very careful of. The Portuguese go and muck it up.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
But marmelo is quince. You see, quince is a honey apple.
Honey apple.
And from quince you make...
quince jam.
Well, yes, you would in this country, but the Portuguese, they make marmalada.
Marmalada, I see. So quince is, known to the Greeks as honey apples, because they're not sweet and look like midget pears, became Portuguese quince marmalada, which we took as the name for orange or yellowy jam.
Yes, well, you see, we took it as orange jam, but we're the only Europeans to make marmalade out of citrus fruits.
Right, and the Portuguese, they stick to quinces?
Well, other countries, you see, they make them out of all sorts of fruit, including carrots, in fact.
Carrots?
Yeah. Yeah,
but carrots, that's not a fruit in my book. Or in anybody's book.
Doesn't it look like a carrot to me?
It's strangely reminiscent of,
never
of a
mind
vegetable, isn't it?
Yes. Well, you see, it was a vegetable up until the EC Directive 88/593, which was put in to protect the marmalada makers of Portugal, which reclassified the old carrot as fruit.
Oh, didn't the botanists complain, or the greengrocers, you know, hands off my carrot, something like that?
I think they probably
I see a glimmer of hope here. We could have a definitive ruling then out of the EC, so as which is marmalade and which is jam.
Yes, but there isn't one, that's the problem.
Oh, dear.
It's a bit of a pity, really. The thing is, you have to look at language. Now, language is a tool for naming things.
It's a tool, right.
I wish you'd stop making that thing. Yeah, so language is a tool. Now, you know what you mean by jam when you say
it's
it.
that, yeah.
And you know what you mean by marmalade.
Yeah, it's that, yeah.
OK, so what's the problem?
Well, I think we're still in the pickle, aren't we? Anyway, let's move on. All right, let's go on to a show of hands, or rather a show of handedness. Now, can I just ask you, hands up people here who are right-handed? Hands up right-handed. OK, well, that's obviously a lot of people. And who's left-handed? Now, apparently there should be about 10, 12% who are left-handed. I think that's about right. Now, also according to statistics, there should be a higher proportion of males, blondes, and vegetarians amongst left-handers. Now, is there anyone here who is left-handed, male, blonde, and a vegetarian? Right. Well, that's a shame, because had you been here, I could have fixed you up with a date from people from the back pages of Time Out. But of the left-handers, does anyone here feel they've suffered a disadvantage from being left-handed? Anyone found it irritating to be left? Oh, there you down there. Have you found it difficult being left-handed? What's been the main problem?
I found it difficult as a child. As an adult, there's no problem. In fact, it's a positive advantage, I think.
Well, okay, what's the disadvantage as a child being left-handed?
The fact that you are different, and in the school systems, for instance, they tend to pick on you. Your writing doesn't come out the same way.
Yeah.
It slants the wrong way. You can actually tell when the teacher's reading it.
Yes.
You tilt it the other way.
So you actually got picked on and bullied by, we're right-handers, you're left-handed.
Yes.
Did you go to a particularly rough school? Or anybody else with a disadvantage?
The only disadvantage of being a left-handed woman is being with a right-handed man.
Yes. I'm not sure I want to work that one out. Sounds rather exciting. But you mentioned you had advantages as well as an adult.
Yeah. I find as a left-handed person that you're, from a very early age, making adjustments, learning to be flexible, having to automatically do things with your right hand that people perhaps would never think of doing if they were right-handed with their left hand.
I see, I follow. And it's supposed to have some advantage in some sports, like tennis. Like 25% of top tennis players are left-handed, as compared to something like 0.0001% of top tennis players are British. So it's... Anybody else got to join this debate as a left-hander who's got advantages or disadvantages to relate?
Yes, yeah, when I was 12 years old, I started to learn the violin.
Yes.
And I had a Polish, I think she was Polish or Hungarian teacher, and I struggled for about 6 weeks.
To understand her, obviously.
And then one day she saw me writing something, she said, "But you're left-handed," and clouted me around the ear because I hadn't told her that I was left-handed because I was trying to operate the violin the wrong way around.
I think it's a bit awkward in an orchestra if there's a left-handed violinist because they end up sort of poking the eye out. Next to them. Well, let's move on because we've got a discussion about the problems of left-handedness, and to do that we have to welcome to the studio, you've been patiently waiting for me to get to you, we have Dr. Chris McManus from the Department of Psychology at University College London, welcome, and Diane Paul, Director of the Centre for Left-Handed Studies in Manchester.
That's right.
Is that right? And also in Vancouver, and joining us by satellite, we have Professor Stanley Coren, a psychologist at the University of British Columbia in Canada. Hello, Professor Coren.
Hello.
Hello. I'd like to come to you first because you're the author of a book and some studies of a rather controversial nature. You're suggesting they die earlier, they're basically younger age on average than right-handed people, and that they suffer from more diseases or tend to suffer from things like asthma and alcoholism, all sorts of diseases, in fact.
That's right. Left-handers tend to suffer from a variety of diseases and of other problems, predominantly because about half of all left-handers arrive at their left-handedness through some sort of birth stress or pregnancy complication.
Yeah.
But that's only half the story. The other half of the story is that left-handers are 5 times more likely to die of accident-related injuries.
Yeah.
And that's not because left-handers are clumsier or anything else. It's simply because the world is set up for right-handers.
Well, I think we follow that it's a difficult world for left-handers because it's designed for right-handers in the main. But the first part of what you're saying is perhaps more surprising. You're suggesting it's some left-handed people is a result of what, brain damage in birth or in the womb?
Well, you can look at it this way, that some of the neurological centers and pathways which would normally make us right-handed somehow or another get mucked up.
Yeah.
And so for those individuals, if you will, their handedness becomes a cosmic dice game, and they're likely then to become left-handers, if you will.
So what you're saying, half of left-handers might be sort of brain damage in that sense at birth, and in any event, as a sort of statistical survey, they're likely to die, is it 5 or 6 years younger than a right-handed equivalent?
You can think of it this way. The same problem which caused the left-handedness in the first place brings with it some extra baggage, and that extra baggage, the most important aspect of that extra baggage is that it tends to muck up the immune system a bit.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at George Bush and Bill Clinton, you find that both of them are perfect examples of the left-hander syndrome. George Bush suffers from Graves' disease, which is an immune problem which affects the thyroid, and Clinton has such bad allergies that, in fact, he sometimes loses his voice and has had to cancel speaking engagements because of it.
All right, well, there's some hope there then. But, I think Ronald Reagan was left-handed as well, and he seems to have lived to a very ripe old age. It doesn't seem
That's
to
right. Ronald Reagan is Reagan is left-handed.
Not suggesting he's brain damaged, for goodness sake. All right, well, without being too flippant, there's quite a lot of bad news, really, inherent in what you're saying there about left-handedness. And now, if I can come to you, Dr. McManus, what's your approach to this? Does this make sense to you? Do you accept these theories?
I think not. No, I think the best description of Professor Corran's view is that he's out on a limb. He's simply different from what other people are saying and finding. And the research doesn't support many of the findings.
Well, I've read his book, The Left-Hander Syndrome, and it is supported by, I mean, to the lay readers, what I am, it is supported by plenty of references to research that he's done. He's looked at his baseball pitchers you've gone in and found that left-handed ones tend to die earlier than right-handed ones. Do you not accept that analysis that he's done and his team?
I think that analysis is very suspect indeed. Most epidemiologists, particularly in the States, don't accept the results at all. It's a very dubious analysis. I think many of the other things, the evidence in the book is good, but it's simply not replicated. And there's a study in Britain, for instance, where in 1958, 12,000 children were looked at the time of their birth. The obstetricians and midwives collected data. We followed those children up when they were 7, 11, 16, and so on. And there's simply no hint that the left-handed ones are the ones who had the complications during their birth. And Professor Corran knows this because he cited this work in one of his own research papers.
Now, Chris, wait a minute, hold it.
I'm surprised that it seems so controversial between the two. Are you just sort of reluctant to allow somebody to say, oh, look, left-handed people have such a hard time, or it could have been caused by some
On the contrary,
damage?
in science, it's very easy to find a few studies that seem to support a position which is outlandish, and if this is an outlandish position.
All right, well, can I just bring in Diane Paul at this point? Now, you're director of something called the Centre for Left-Handed Studies in Manchester.
That's right.
Can you split the difference between these two warring factions, or what is the Centre for Left-Handed Studies? Is Manchester a particular place for left-handedness?
Manchester is where I live and where I work, so the centre is there.
Fair enough, so I'm going to start another controversy about that.
The centre was set up because I also wrote a book about left-handedness, which came out before Professor Corran, which was written for the layman, because I found that looking at the literature, it was written mostly in gobbledygook, and I couldn't understand a word of it. So I was asked to write a book which would help parents. I then had a flood of requests from anxious parents and teachers who said, how do we cope with our left-handed children? So I come from a different world, because while all this research is going on, and I agree that it has to be done, it's very important, we want to know why we're left-handed, but I'm very alarmed at the amount of money over the years that has been pushed into research internationally. And this is the sort of thing that we get. The one scientist says one thing, another says another, and they can't agree with one another. We still don't know why we're left-handed. But nothing is being done to help children at school, practically, who have problems, and this is what we're trying to do.
All right, well, that's some of the upset of being left-handed, but Chris McManus, if I can ask you, I mean, do you accept that left-handed people have, quite apart from the dealing with the right-handed, will have a difficulty and die a bit earlier and come out? I mean, it's a worrying proposition the professor makes. I mean, is it one you would say is right, or is...
I accept Stan's position entirely, that left-handers live in a right-handed world, and that's difficult. And it's scandalous the way designers simply ignore the needs of this minority. But whether left-handedness is really a serious disadvantage is another matter. And there's no, I'd submit there's no substantive evidence that left-handers do die earlier. The data are simply badly analysed, and there's very little evidence that they suffer from most of these diseases.
All right, well, there we are. We have, I think, whatever the opposite of a consensus is, but there we must leave it. Thank you very much, Dr. Chris McManus, Diane Paul, and Professor Stanley Corran.
Thank you.
Now we move on to a query based on something that perhaps not a lot of people know or not a lot of people have noticed. The question is, why do stripes on British ties go in the opposite direction to stripes on American ties? Now, it's not something I'd noticed, I must say, but apparently British ties, if you're a man, you have a stripe, it always goes down like that, which is from left to right as I'm holding it, but right to left as you look at it. Whereas the American tie, which we've had specially flown in, it goes the opposite way, which is like that. Now, why is this?
The reason why the stripes on British men's ties run from the top right to the bottom left as you're looking towards me is a throwback to the days of heraldry. Men wear ties to show that they have some interests in common, whether it's the old school or the regiment or a club. Sometimes they just have a simple device, such as a lion or an eagle. On other occasions they have a full coat of arms. In this particular occasion they have stripes, which in heraldry are known as bends. And the bend which runs from the top right to the bottom left, which in heraldic terms is dexter chief to sinister base, is a straightforward bend. There is an alternative bend which runs in the opposite direction, and this is known as a bend sinister, and it is a sign of bastardy. And I'll leave my American friends to explain why they've chosen that particular stripe.
We move on to another question which may or may not be connected, which is, why do flies congregate around a central light fitting even when it's not on? This age-old puzzler I put to Professor Sir James Bimmont.
If you stick a fly on the end of a piece of wire with a bit of wax and hold it out like that, it doesn't immediately start flapping its wings.
No.
If you take a piece of paper with stripes on it or any big pattern and move it past the fly says, the world's going by, I must be flying, and then starts flapping its wings.
Right.
If you do that with a piece of plain paper, it doesn't flap its wings.
No.
So now consider a fly coming into a room, big expanse of white ceiling. It's got no landmarks at all. It's in exactly the same sort of position that you would be if you're in an aircraft looking down at the sea. You've no idea how far away the sea is. As soon as a ship comes into view, it does give you some sense of perspective and some sense of reality. In exactly the same way, your fly is flying up along the ceiling. A sea of whiteness. There is an object. It is different in shape, it is different in everything to the ceiling. Therefore, it is a place which it is safe to land on. The moment it's landed, being a typical fly, it's probably been feeding. A fly has a very unusual tongue, which has got a sieve on the end of it, a sieve which it can actually vary the size of the holes in. It filters off the liquid which it takes in, leaving all the debris on the surface of it. It will then want to clean that off. So its first action is to clean off the debris, dump it, may dump one or two other things as well. That's right. Now, along comes your next fly. It's not only got a landmark in this white sea, it's also got smell of fly food, it's got smell of fly. So it's a doubly attractive place. Before you know where you are, you've got a fly park.
So it's food, it's a kind of a disco because there's other people around there.
Yes, or I like to look at it as being rather the same as a nice country road where people are looking for somewhere to park. They see a verge, they drive on, they dump their rubbish. The next person who drives along the road says, oh, look, there's a place where cars have been and rubbish. They do the same. Before you know where you are, you've got a lay-by created out of nothing. It's just the same sort of phenomenon.
You get fly tipping and, of course, the...
Just that.
Right, let's go to another important scientific question which has been sent in. If I am 6 feet tall, my girlfriend is only 5'6" is there a difference in the distance to the horizon we can see?
A lot of blue. Sid, how far can we see? If I was 6 feet tall, how far could I see?
Well, there's a very simple rule. We take half as much again, and that means that 6 would become 9.
Yes.
And then we take the square root, 3, and you could see to the horizon 3 miles.
So you take the height of a person in feet, multiply that by 1.5, take the square root, and that's the distance to the horizon in miles. But how accurate is it, Sid? Because if you're going from miles to feet, is it just fortuitous that it happens to work out like this? Or?
Yes, it is.
But how accurate is it? Is it to 1%, 5%?
Well, at this height above sea level of 6 feet, it's within 1/100 of an inch.
Now, we're standing next to a very tall cliff here. This is, how high is this?
This is about 150 feet above the sea level.
And how far could I see if I stood up there?
Well, 150, the same rule, half as much again, makes it up to 225. The square root is 15, and you could see the horizon at 15 miles.
So after 150 feet of hard slog up this cliff, we can see a lot further than we could down below. Now, according to this algebraic formula, the difference in the distance that people can see to the horizon between a person who's 5'6" and somebody who is 6 feet tall is about 220 yards when you're standing on the beach. Now, Gordon, what would you say the difference is?
Well, I would say the difference, according to the formula, is that amount. But what I'm saying is we've been asking how much further can the person see? And what I'm saying is they both see almost identical horizons because of atmospherical effects. So, for example, take the fact that you've drawn here a perfect sphere. And these formulae rely on the fact that the Earth, you assume, is a perfect sphere, and we know it isn't. We know that the sea has tides. We know that the sea level will change as a result. We know furthermore that the whole shape of the Earth is somehow squidged in at the top end. So you can't really use this formula at all.
And what formula can we use?
Well, you have to use a very, very complex formula, and perhaps even a computer.
So would it make any difference if we used a telescope?
Not at all. No.
Why not?
Wouldn't help at all.
Why?
Because you'd see more of the haze and more of the fringing and more of the aberration at the edge on the horizon.
But you couldn't see any further, you claim?
No, not really.
Well, we're obviously not going to resolve it here. Let's go down to the beach again.
Let's take into effect atmospheric aberration, all the other things that we discussed.
Right, but can you put a figure on that?
No, I don't need to, because the point is it's all hidden there. It's just error.
Right, well, let's move on. Now, this is a question. Does scratching your head really help you think? Well, here's a theory about the subject.
Scratching your head seems to have no particular purpose, unless you've got an itch, that is. Because it has no particular purpose, it's a kind of behaviour which can be called displacement activity, where the energy for any kind of behaviour is displaced into an inappropriate kind of behaviour. And this can be compared with certain kinds of behaviour in the animal world, an example of which is the behaviour of the male stickleback, when another male stickleback blunders into his territory. And the male stickleback then chases the second male stickleback out of his territory, but as soon as they're in the other male stickleback's territory, there's a reversal of roles. The other male stickleback chases him back into the original territory. But if they're right at the edge of their zone, then something rather like scratching of heads goes on, because they don't know what to do. They have an impulse to chase and an impulse to retreat. And so they do something which is quite inappropriate. They stand on their heads. They go like that, and with their mouths downwards, and start picking up stones and bits of weed, which is essentially a behaviour associated with nest building. The male stickleback builds the nest, but it's quite inappropriate in this instance. So it's rather like head scratching in that there's energy there to be dealt with, but there's no particular, there's a lack of decision about it. And so it neither goes the one way nor the other way, but you scratch your head or you go head downwards and pick up stones.
What is a billion? Fairly straightforward question. What's a billion, Carol?
Well, it sounds fairly straightforward, but according to the concise Oxford Dictionary, the word billion means both 1 million million and 1,000 million. And this confusion arises because until recently, the word billion in this country did mean 1 million million. That is, the number 1 followed by 12 noughts. But unfortunately, across the Atlantic, in a country with a surprisingly similar language to ours, a billion meant 1,000 million, or 1 followed by 9 noughts. Now, this state of affairs obviously was very confusing for scientists and economists, but because it's a handy number to use when you're talking about dollars or sterling, we, in this country, began to adopt the American meaning of the word, and generally it's now understood to mean 1,000 million.
All right, so we're just following the American way, like language generally and foreign policy, stuff like that. So what is trillion?
All right, a trillion, that's a 1 followed by 18 noughts, or a billion billion, the exact number of excuses in a politician's handbook.
Right. Now, if sexual activity was the only form of exercise, for how long and how often would you have to do it to keep fit? Well, this is a question which teams sex, fitness and calorie counting, ideal territory for a woman's magazine. And we have here the editor of Company magazine, Mandy Norwood. Now, Mandy, I know you've done a bit of research into this. How does sex compare to other forms of exercise, such as jogging or riding a bike?
Well, any fitness expert will actually tell you that sex is the best form of exercise around.
Well, it's most fun, anyway.
Well, it certainly is, which always helps.
Yeah.
But it actually doubles your metabolism, trebles your heart rate, and works virtually every single muscle in your body. So it's excellent for keeping fit.
Every single muscle in your body?
Every single muscle.
What for people who just sort of lie back and think of England? Do they, that sort of person, generally?
Well, you're not going to burn off many calories if you just lie back and think of England.
No.
The thing is, it's not so much the quantity of sex, but the quality of sex that we're talking about.
So size isn't important, is what you're saying?
Size isn't important at all. It's how you use it.
But surely the amount of... Yes, absolutely. But surely the amount of time is a factor. So if you have like a full, long, enduring session of sex lasting for, say, a minute, would that...
So you're not very fit then, Clive?
No, I do a lot of training. No, but I mean, how long do you have to... This is basically the form of the question. So how often and how long do you have to do it for to be the equivalent of doing a sort of 10-mile run or something?
The best thing to do, really, if you want to keep very, very fit, is to indulge in lots and lots of foreplay. So, for example, 15 minutes worth of ear nibbling.
Ear nibbling.
Ear nibbling would probably use up about 25 calories, okay? Followed by...
Use up most of your ears as well. I mean, if you bite a bit of the ear off and swallow it, that's going to put it all back on again, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Thigh licking.
Thigh licking,
yeah. Now
this is all stuff you're used to talking about in women's magazines. This is... You're breaking barriers on television. Thigh licking, yes.
Thigh licking is about double that in calories. So we're talking about 35 calories for thigh licking.
How does that work then? Because I'd have thought ear nibbling involved... No, your muscles there. Licking is just your tongue muscle.
Oh no, but presumably you have to get down on all fours. Yes, exactly. And the third thing is...
Well, it's strictly entirely necessary, but... okay, that's what you call foreplay, or all foreplay.
That's right.
And that uses up more energy, more calories?
Absolutely. And of course there's always the toe sucking.
Yes.
And depending on how big they are. I mean, we're looking at sort of about 45 calories used up in toe sucking.
Yes.
But if you add all that together, followed by explosive sex, I mean really good sex, and a real orgasm.
Right.
What you're looking at is using up about 335 calories.
Now you're stressing the real orgasm. Would a fake orgasm, would that not do?
No.
Fake calories. This is all a closed book to me, this, anyway.
In fact, the difference between a real orgasm and a fake orgasm is actually quite dramatic.
Yeah.
A fake orgasm, you will only burn up about 54 calories.
Yes.
But with a real orgasm, you'll burn up about 70 calories, which is the equivalent of, say, a small peanut butter cookie.
Right. I mean, would this be a serious suggestion in one of your columns as a way of losing weight rather than going to the gym or to the going on a diet or something like that?
It would be a good alternative. It would be a very good alternative, because not only are you burning up fat, but you're actually toning up all the muscles in your body, specifically your inner thighs.
Yes.
Your buttocks, your stomach, and your pelvic floor.
You've seen me doing this, haven't you?
And, you know, for example, half an hour between the sheets with your partner is just absolutely fabulous for turning up your buttocks. But just imagine if you had to sort of roll from side to side on the carpet to do that, you know, as a form of exercise. I mean, imagine the carpet afterwards for a start.
Yeah, you wouldn't do it.
It would be half as much fun.
On your own, you just wouldn't do it. All this sort of stuff. You might not. Anyway, we'll have to leave it there for this evening. Thank you very much, Mandy Norwood.
Why do clean sheets feel colder when you put them on the bed than used sheets?
Clean sheets feel colder than used sheets? Well, depends how recently they were used, I suppose. Let's go into it. Yes, crisp linen sheets. Yes, I suppose they feel colder. That's a good question. I don't know who would answer that. A hotel keeper with a degree in physics might be there. Yes?
Why do we always go up to heaven and down to hell?
We don't always do it. You do it once, I think.
Where do all the dead birds go?
Well, there's a couple of sort of discos that I've been to that have been...
If you have a query you'd like us to deal with, you could try your luck by writing to Notes and Queries, room 4008, BBC Television Centre, Wood Lane, London, W12 7RJ.